The weight of a broken heart. The rain had fallen all night, a steady rhythm that soaked the earth and washed the streets clean of yesterday's dust. But inside the hospital room, time felt heavier than the storm clouds above the city. Rosaline Carter sat by the window, her hand pressed to the cool glass as if trying to hold on to the world outside. Yet every beat of her weak and faltering heart reminded her how fragile her connection to life had become. At 24 years old, she should have been thinking about her future, about love, about chasing dreams, about the endless road still waiting for her footsteps. But instead, her world had shrunk to the walls of this hospital, to the constant beeping of monitors, to the icy whispers of mortality that came closer each night. For months she had been told to be strong, to have faith, to endure the endless tests and treatments. But strength was difficult when your heart betrayed you with each uneven rhythm. It was not just a medical condition. It was a shadow that consumed her days and haunted her nights. When Dr. Helena Morris entered the room that morning, her presence carried with it the weight of finality and hope in equal measure. The doctor's gray hair was pulled neatly into a bun, her eyes calm but edged with the fatigue of someone who had walked too many families through the valley between despair and survival. She held a folder in her hands, and Rosaline's eyes locked onto it as though it contained the very secret of her destiny. "Good morning, Rosaline," the doctor said softly, settling into the chair beside her bed. "How are you holding up today?" It was a gentle question, one asked 100 times before, but today Rosaline did not answer with a smile or with polite words meant to ease the heaviness in the room. Instead, her voice trembled with raw honesty. "Like my heart doesn't want to go on," she whispered, her gaze fixed on the rain outside. "Like it's giving up on me." The doctor nodded, not with surprise, but with a knowing compassion. "That's exactly why I'm here," she said, her tone carrying something different this time, something that made Rosaline slowly turn her head. "We have a donor heart available." The words hung in the air like an impossible bridge, one Rosaline was not sure she was brave enough to cross. A donor heart meant someone else's life had ended. Someone's tragedy had become her only chance at survival. She swallowed hard, her throat dry, her fingers tightening on the blanket pulled across her lap. "Tell me about the donor," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. The doctor glanced at her notes before replying, her voice steady. "Male, 52 years old, physically healthy, an excellent match for your size and blood type." He passed suddenly peacefully from a brain aneurysm. "The family has requested privacy, but they agreed to the donation. This heart is a perfect chance for you." Rosaline closed her eyes, the weight of those words pressing into her chest. Somewhere a family was grieving. Somewhere, tears were being shed over a man's death. While here she was, being given the opportunity to breathe again, to live again, to hope again. The paradox of it all was almost unbearable. She wondered if she would dream his dreams, if she would feel his regrets, if the heart inside her would carry memories not her own. Hours blurred into preparation. Nurses moved around her with practiced precision, checking monitors, drawing blood, adjusting IV drips. The anesthesiologist came in with calm efficiency, explaining each step in a voice that was meant to soothe but only reminded her that she would soon be trusting strangers with her very life. Through it all, she clung to one thought: her younger brother David. At 19, he had grown too quickly into adulthood, forced by tragedy and responsibility to carry burdens far heavier than his years. Their parents had died years earlier, first their father after the crushing collapse of their family business, and then their mother, her spirit broken by loss and poverty. Through every storm, David had stood by her, protective and fierce, determined to shield his sister from further pain. When he rushed into the hospital hours later, breathless and wild-eyed from racing across town, Rosaline's heart swelled with a love so fierce it almost hurt more than her illness. "Rosie," he gasped, wrapping her in a hug that was careful not to disturb the tubes and wires. "I came as fast as I could. I'm here, I'm not leaving your side." She clung to him, her voice breaking. "They found a heart, David. Today, it's happening today." He pulled back just enough to look into her eyes, his own brimming with unshed tears. "Then this is it," he said, steadying himself. "This is your chance. You'll live. You'll have a future." But she shook her head, fear swirling inside her. "Someone died, David. Someone's family is grieving, so I can have a second chance. How do I carry that weight?" David's answer came not with hesitation, but with the conviction of someone who had spent years holding broken things together. "You carry it by living," he said firmly, his voice rich with emotion. "You honor them with every breath you take, with every good thing you do, with every joy you allow yourself to feel. You carry it by refusing to waste the gift." His words sank into her like sunlight breaking through the storm clouds. As they wheeled her toward the operating room, fear battled with faith inside her. She reached for David's hand, squeezing tightly. "If something goes wrong," she began, but he cut her off, gripping her hand even tighter. "Nothing's going wrong. You're coming back to me. But if you need to tell me something, say it now." Her lips trembled as memories rose unbidden, memories of anger, bitterness, and betrayal. The man who destroyed Dad's business, who ruined everything. Thomas Sinclair. I've hated him for years. But lying here, knowing someone else's heart will beat inside me, I realize I can't carry that hatred anymore. It's too heavy. If I don't make it, tell everyone I forgave him, because hatred only poisons the person who carries it. David's throat tightened, his eyes fierce. "You're going to live, Rosie. You'll get your chance to prove that forgiveness isn't weakness, it's strength. And you'll do it with a new heart beating strong inside you." Those were the last words she clung to as the anesthesia pulled her into darkness. The surgery stretched across 6 endless hours. David paced the sterile waiting room like a caged animal, his mind a whirlwind of fear and hope, his body trembling from too much caffeine and too little sleep. Every stranger who walked through the room, every whispered prayer offered by families waiting for their own news, became part of the symphony of his vigil. When Dr. Morris finally emerged, her tired smile broke the tension like sunlight through the clouds. "She made it," the doctor announced, her voice steady but warm. "The new heart is strong. The surgery was successful. She'll need time to recover, but she's alive." Relief crashed over David so hard he nearly collapsed. He had never prayed harder in his life, and in that moment every prayer felt answered. He would have his sister back. Recovery was not a straight road. Some days Rosaline felt stronger than she had in years, marveling at the powerful, steady rhythm in her chest. Other days the medications dragged her into exhaustion, her body sluggish and unfamiliar. But through it all she felt something else, something strange, something that could not be explained by science. She began to dream. They were not her dreams. She saw boardrooms, skyscrapers, handshakes sealed over deals worth millions. She felt the weight of guilt pressing down on a man who had made choices that destroyed lives, yet who longed for forgiveness he never sought. She woke from those dreams with her hand pressed to her chest, her heart pounding as though remembering what her mind could not. 6 weeks later, when she was finally strong enough to leave the hospital, David walked her back to the tiny apartment they had shared since their parents' deaths. Everything looked the same. The faded couch, the cracked kitchen tiles, the photographs still taped to the fridge. But Rosaline felt different, as though her very soul had shifted. Each beat of her new heart was a reminder that she was carrying not just her own life, but the echoes of another's. And though she didn't yet know it, that heart would soon lead her straight into the path of the man whose name she thought she had already forgiven, but whose presence would test every ounce of that forgiveness. The stranger at the window. The autumn sun rose gently over the city, spilling light across streets still damp from the night's rain, and for the first time in months, Rosaline felt strong enough to step beyond the threshold of her apartment without her brother hovering anxiously beside her. David had pleaded with her to wait another week, to give herself more time, but she knew that if she kept waiting for the perfect moment, she would never reclaim her life. Each beat of her new heart urged her forward, whispering that life was not something to be watched from a window but something to be lived, fragile yet precious. She wrapped herself in a long coat, tied a scarf around her neck, and walked slowly down the 3 blocks to a small cafe she had often passed but never entered. The cafe was warm and filled with the rich aroma of roasted beans, cinnamon, and vanilla. Its mismatched chairs and faded wooden tables created an atmosphere of comfort rather than perfection, the kind of place where people came not just for coffee, but to linger, to talk, to feel less alone. Rosaline ordered a cappuccino, her hands trembling slightly as she carried it to a seat by the window. The world outside seemed alive in ways she had never noticed before. The rush of people hurrying to work, the laughter of 2 children chasing a yellow balloon, the subtle dance of leaves carried by the crisp autumn wind. She sat there, her fingers wrapped around the warm cup, marveling that she was alive to see it. That was when he walked in. The man had the kind of presence that pulled attention without effort. He moved with quiet confidence, not arrogance, but a steadiness that suggested he had learned to carry heavy things without letting them crush him. His dark hair was tousled by the breeze, his coat damp at the shoulders from the lingering drizzle, and yet there was something in his face, an invisible weight, a grief carefully hidden behind polite composure. As he held the door open for an elderly woman and offered her a kind smile, Rosaline felt something stir in her chest, a strange familiarity that made her shift uneasily in her seat. She pressed her hand against her sternum, feeling the strong beat of the heart within her, steady and unyielding, as if it recognized him before she did. He scanned the cafe, clearly looking for a quiet corner, but his eyes caught hers instead. For a moment the world narrowed, the chatter of customers and clinking of cups fading into silence. He hesitated, then walked toward her table. "Excuse me," he said, his voice deep but softened by nervous politeness. "Would you mind if I sit here? It seems like the other tables are taken." Rosaline glanced around. The cafe was nearly empty, but his awkward smile betrayed the truth. He wanted to sit with her, not because of convenience, but because something about her presence drew him in. With a faintly amused smile, she gestured to the chair opposite her. "Go ahead." He introduced himself as Gabriel Sinclair. The name struck her faintly, though she could not immediately place why. His words came easily, not with the rehearsed rhythm of someone used to impressing others, but with the genuine warmth of a man who wanted to be understood. They spoke for an hour, and in that time Rosaline learned that he worked in technology, building systems meant to help small businesses survive against larger competitors. He spoke with passion about fairness, about giving back, about using privilege for good rather than greed. She found herself captivated, not just by his ideas, but by the sincerity in his voice, the way his eyes lit up when he talked about doing better than those who had come before him. Rosaline, in turn, shared pieces of herself she had long kept hidden from strangers. She told him about her love for nursing, her joy in caring for children at the hospital, her belief that healing was not just about medicine, but about kindness. She even confessed, with a self-deprecating laugh, that she had recently undergone a heart transplant and was still adjusting to the rhythm of life with someone else's heart beating in her chest. Gabriel listened with rapt attention, not with pity but with admiration, as though he saw in her resilience something remarkable. By the time he glanced at his watch and realized he was late for an important meeting, the bond between them had already formed, delicate but undeniable. "Would you like to meet here again? Same time next week?" he asked, and Rosaline felt that strange flutter in her chest once more. The sensation she could no longer tell was her own, or the echo of the donor heart's memories. She hesitated only briefly before nodding. "Yes, I'd like that." As Gabriel walked away, Rosaline pressed her hand over her chest again, startled by the strong, almost eager rhythm of her heartbeat. For the first time since her surgery, she was not just grateful to be alive, she was excited. What she could not know was the secret written in Gabriel's bloodline, the truth that would one day unravel everything they were beginning to build. Over the weeks that followed, their Tuesday meetings became the highlight of her recovery. They spoke of everything: books, movies, the meaning of family, the scars of grief. Gabriel revealed little by little that his father had passed away recently, and though their relationship had been complicated, the loss left him unsettled. He admitted that his father had been a powerful businessman, wealthy and respected but also ruthless, making decisions that left ruin in their wake. He spoke of wanting to build a different legacy, to right the wrongs he had witnessed but could not stop. It was during one of those conversations, on a cold November morning, that the truth began to surface. Rosaline, curious but cautious, asked about the kind of businesses his father had run. Gabriel hesitated, then said, "Manufacturing mostly. Real estate too. He was skilled at acquiring struggling companies and turning them profitable. But it often meant closing factories, moving jobs overseas. I hated it. I tried to fight him on it, but I was young and he didn't listen." The name of one factory slipped from his lips, Carter Manufacturing, and the world tilted for Rosaline. Her cup nearly slipped from her hand. The cafe, once warm and safe, suddenly felt suffocating. Carter Manufacturing had been her father's life's work, the heart of her small hometown, the place that had provided for hundreds of families until it was shut down overnight by the ruthless hand of Thomas Sinclair. The stress of losing everything had led to her father's fatal heart attack, followed months later by her mother's death from grief. Their family had been destroyed by Sinclair's decisions. Rosaline's breath caught, her chest tightening as though her new heart itself rebelled at the truth. "Carter Manufacturing?" she repeated, her voice shaking. Gabriel looked up, startled by the change in her tone. "Yes, my father's company bought it years ago. I tried to convince him to keep it open, but why do you ask?" Tears blurred her vision. The answer struck like thunder. "Because it was my father's factory. Your father destroyed my family." The words left her lips like broken glass. Gabriel froze, his face drained of color, his hand trembling as he set his cup down. "Rosaline, I swear I didn't know. If I had—" But she had already pushed back from the table, her chair scraping against the floor. "You're Thomas Sinclair's son," she whispered, her voice full of betrayal. "The man who ruined my family. The man I swore I had forgiven, and now his heart beats inside me." Her hand clutched her chest as she fled the cafe, the rhythm of her heart pounding with painful intensity. Behind her, Gabriel stood frozen, his world collapsing beneath the weight of a truth neither of them had been prepared to face. The burden of truth. The days that followed their confrontation in the cafe were among the heaviest of Rosaline's life. Heavier even than the weeks she had spent waiting for a heart transplant. Heavier than the long nights when she thought her next breath might be her last. Before, her pain had been a private battle against her own body, a struggle she had carried quietly with her brother's support. But now the war was inside her mind and spirit, a storm of anger and confusion, because the man who had ruined her family's life was connected to her in two inescapable ways. First through the destruction he had caused years ago, and now in the most chilling irony of all, through the heart that beat inside her chest. She could not escape it. Each time she pressed her palm to her chest, she wondered whose heart it truly was. Hers, the donor's, or the ghost of Thomas Sinclair, the ruthless businessman who had taken everything from her family. She dreamed more frequently now. Strange and haunting dreams that carried flashes of boardrooms, signatures on contracts, arguments between father and son, guilt buried beneath pride. She awoke drenched in sweat, her pulse racing, her mind whispering that the past could not be buried because it now lived inside her. Beat after relentless beat, David noticed her restlessness, the way her eyes seemed to linger on nothing, the way she paced the apartment as though her own walls had betrayed her. "Rosie," he said one evening, placing a steadying hand on her shoulder. "You've been through too much to let this man break you. If Sinclair destroyed our family, then let that be his shame, not your burden. Don't give him more power over your life than he already took." But Rosaline shook her head, her voice trembling with conviction. "It's not that simple, David. I can't ignore it. His son, Gabriel, he isn't his father, but when I look at him, I see the shadow of everything we lost. And yet I feel something I don't understand, something I can't explain." Because the truth, no matter how much she resisted it, was that Gabriel had not been the ruthless man his father was. In their conversations at the cafe, she had seen kindness, integrity, and remorse. He had spoken of fairness, of trying to balance the scales, of fighting against decisions that cost families their livelihoods. His eyes had held sorrow, not greed. And though part of her wanted to hate him simply for the name he carried, another part of her could not reconcile that hatred with the man she had come to know. That contradiction tore at her, leaving her sleepless, caught between rage and reluctant hope. Gabriel, too, was tormented. For 3 days after that disastrous revelation, he barely ate, barely slept. He shut himself inside his late father's office, a room filled with the relics of power, polished desks, leather chairs, shelves of awards and photographs from banquets where Thomas Sinclair had been celebrated for the very decisions that had ruined lives. Gabriel stared at those photographs and felt the full weight of his father's legacy pressing down upon him. He remembered the arguments they had shared, the way he had pleaded with his father to see the human cost of his decisions, the way his father had dismissed him as naive. He had hated those choices, yet here he was carrying his father's name, his fortune, and his guilt. And now he had discovered that the woman who had reignited light in his grief-stricken life was one of the very people his father had harmed most deeply. He wanted to run to her, to explain, to beg for her to believe him, but he knew words would mean little when the wound was still raw. So instead he began to dig. He opened files, scoured records, and unearthed the contracts his father had signed when Carter Manufacturing was bought and dismantled. And what he found broke him further. Memos where his father had ignored warnings about the devastation it would cause to the small town. Reports where Gabriel's own protests were marked down as irrelevant in neat handwriting. In every line he saw the arrogance of a man who believed wealth excused cruelty. And in every line Gabriel also saw a chance to do what his father never would. To make things right. When he finally reached out to Rosaline again, his voice shook on the phone, but not with weakness, with determination. "Please meet me," he said. "I know you don't trust me. I know you don't want to see me. But I have something to show you. It's not an excuse. It's not an apology. It's the truth, please." Against her better judgment, against the storm in her chest, she agreed. Perhaps it was because part of her needed answers. Perhaps it was because her new heart seemed to beat harder each time she thought of him, as though it refused to let her walk away. They met in the same cafe where the truth had first shattered between them. This time there were no warm smiles, no gentle laughter over shared stories. Rosaline sat rigidly, her hands wrapped tightly around her cup, her eyes fixed on him with guarded pain. Gabriel slid a folder across the table, his hand trembling slightly. "These are the records," he said. "Everything my father did. Everything I tried to stop. You deserve to see it. You deserve to know the whole truth." She hesitated, then opened the folder. Pages of contracts, memos, financial statements stared back at her. She saw her father's factory reduced to numbers, to profit margins, to cold calculations that ignored human lives. She saw Gabriel's comments scribbled in margins, pleas for compassion, for alternative solutions, for preserving jobs. Tears blurred her vision as she realized he had fought, he had tried, but he had been silenced. Slowly, she lifted her gaze to meet his. "You're not him," she whispered, the words tasting strange on her tongue. "You're not Thomas Sinclair." Gabriel's eyes filled with emotion, his voice breaking. "I've spent my whole life trying not to be him, and now all I want is to spend whatever time I have left proving to you that I'm not. But I can't change the past. All I can do is ask. Let me show you that a different future is possible." Rosaline's chest tightened, not with anger this time, but with the unbearable weight of choice. Could she open her heart to the son of the man who had destroyed her family? Could she trust someone who carried the Sinclair name? Or was forgiveness the very thing she had promised herself in the hospital? The path she was meant to walk. Outside the cafe window, the city moved on, unaware that inside, two lives were balanced on the edge of a decision that could change them both forever. The price of redemption. The winter air bit sharply at Rosaline's face as she walked home that evening, her thoughts heavier than the cold wind that whipped through the streets. The folder Gabriel had given her remained clutched in her hand, its weight far greater than paper and ink. It was the weight of truth, of years of pain explained but not erased, of a future that trembled between rejection and reconciliation. She had seen his handwriting in the margins of those reports. Pleas for compassion, arguments against cruelty, quiet rebellions that had been silenced by a father too powerful to defy. That knowledge gnawed at her, whispering that perhaps she had judged Gabriel too harshly, that perhaps he was not the villain her wounds had painted him to be. But the name Sinclair was like a scar across her heart, and every time she thought of it, anger surged like an old flame refusing to die. For days she avoided him. She buried herself in the small routines of recovery, in quiet evenings with David, in long walks meant to clear her mind but which only filled it with more questions. Yet she could not silence the dreams. They returned each night, vivid and unrelenting. Dreams of Thomas Sinclair's life, of his regrets, of his unspoken desire to make amends before it was too late. In those dreams she felt his desperation, his loneliness, his hunger for forgiveness he never asked for. She awoke breathless, her hand pressed to her chest, wondering if the heart inside her carried not just his strength, but his unfinished story. Gabriel, meanwhile, had thrown himself into action. He knew words alone would never be enough. He needed to show her, through deeds, that he was not his father's son in spirit, that he could use the wealth and power he had inherited not for destruction, but for healing. He began by contacting former employees of Carter Manufacturing, seeking out the men and women whose lives had been shattered by its closure. He listened to their stories, their bitterness, their struggles. He wrote checks quietly to cover debts, arranged new opportunities for those still searching for work, and created a foundation in Rosaline's father's Name, the Carter Hope Fund, dedicated to supporting families in small towns devastated by corporate greed. When he finally summoned the courage to tell Rosalind what he had done, he did not come with pride or arrogance. He came with humility, his voice soft as he explained, "I know I can never undo what my father did, but I can honor the people he harmed. I can honor your family's name. This isn't about redemption for me. It's about justice for them and for you." He handed her a document bearing the foundation's name, the first projects already underway. Rosalind stared at it, her heart pounding. Her father's name, once buried beneath shame and tragedy, now stood boldly as a symbol of hope. Tears filled her eyes, but not only from gratitude. There was fear too. Fear of what it would mean to let Gabriel into her life. Fear of the whispers that forgiveness would bring. Fear that opening her heart to him would dishonor the pain of her parents' deaths. Yet beneath that fear was something stronger, something undeniable. The sense that her new heart was urging her forward, that life had given her not just survival but purpose. One evening, as snow began to fall in soft, glittering silence, Rosalind invited Gabriel to walk with her. They wandered through the quiet streets, their breath visible in the cold air, their footsteps crunching against fresh snow. For a long time they did not speak until finally she turned to him, her eyes searching his. "Why?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Why go through all this trouble? You don't owe me anything. You could have walked away." Gabriel stopped, his hands buried in his coat pockets, his gaze steady on her face. "Because I can't walk away," he said simply. "Because when I met you, I felt something I've never felt before. Like the universe was giving me a chance to rewrite my father's story." You carry his heart, Rosalind, but you also carry something greater. Your own strength, your own forgiveness. And if you can find it in yourself to forgive me, not for what he did, but for who I am, then maybe we both get to start over. Her breath caught, her chest tightening with a mix of sorrow and hope. She wanted to believe him, wanted to let go of the bitterness that chained her to the past. But forgiveness was not a gift easily given. It was a mountain climbed step by painful step. "I don't know if I can," she admitted, her voice breaking. "But I want to try." For the first time in years, Gabriel felt something like peace. It was not a promise, not a resolution, but it was a beginning. And beginnings, he knew, were rare and sacred things. Yet even as their bond deepened, shadows lingered. Whispers began to spread. Former employees of Thomas Sinclair's empire who saw Gabriel's actions not as redemption, but as betrayal of his father's legacy. Investors who resented the resources he poured into repairing broken communities. Board members who questioned his priorities. The name Sinclair, once synonymous with ruthless power, was now becoming a symbol of change, and not everyone welcomed that change. Threats arrived in emails, anonymous letters, even subtle warnings from old allies of his father's empire who believed Gabriel was dismantling everything Thomas had built. Rosalind saw the strain in his eyes, the fatigue he tried to hide. She felt her heart, her father's legacy, Thomas Sinclair's gift, her own fragile lifeline, beat harder whenever he was near, as if warning her that their story was far from over. The storm was not behind them. It was ahead, and together, they would have to decide whether forgiveness was strong enough to withstand the weight of the world. The heart that forgives spring arrived with the sound of birdsong and the scent of blossoms drifting through the city streets. But for Rosalind and Gabriel, it was not simply a change of season. It was the fragile dawn of a new chapter in both their lives. They had walked through shadows together, carrying the burdens of history, of grief, of betrayal, yet somehow they had not let those shadows consume them. Each step forward had been hesitant, but each had also been brave. Rosalind had chosen to let go of hatred, not because the past could ever be erased, but because carrying it weighed too heavily on the life she wanted to live. Gabriel had chosen to face the ghosts of his father's empire, not by defending the legacy he inherited, but by reshaping it into something his father could never have imagined, something rooted in compassion rather than power. Still, peace was not easily won. Whispers continued in boardrooms and on the tongues of old men who had once praised Thomas Sinclair. To them, Gabriel's actions were treasonous. They called him weak for giving away money, for building schools and community centers where factories once stood, for lifting the broken instead of chasing profits. Some even threatened to withdraw their support, hoping to frighten him back into the mold his father had left behind. But Gabriel stood firm. If the cost of compassion is power, he told his board one stormy afternoon, then power was never worth having. His words sent ripples through the room, dividing those who admired his courage from those who despised his resolve. Rosaline, meanwhile, faced her own trial. For months she had lived in quiet anonymity, just another patient who had survived a transplant. But as Gabriel's foundation grew, the story of her connection to it began to spread. A journalist uncovered the truth, that the Carter Hope Fund was named after her father, that Gabriel Sinclair was not only the son of Thomas Sinclair but the man whose father's heart now beat within her. The headlines swept through the city like fire, turning their private struggle into a public spectacle. Some praised the story as miraculous, a tale of fate binding enemies into allies. Others mocked it as a scandal, claiming that Gabriel had manipulated tragedy into a spectacle of redemption. Rosaline found herself caught between admiration and criticism, her name suddenly spoken in places she had never imagined. For a time, she retreated inward, frightened of the glare of public judgment. But one evening, as she sat by the window with David, her brother looked at her with the same fierce determination that had carried them through every storm. "Rosie," he said, "our parents taught us that dignity isn't in what the world says about you. It's in how you live. If people want to talk, let them talk. What matters is that you are alive, that you've chosen forgiveness, and that you're standing beside someone trying to make things right. That's your truth. And truth doesn't need defending, it needs living." His words pierced through her fear like sunlight through cloud. And in that moment, she understood that silence was no longer her place. The following week, Rosaline joined Gabriel at a public event where the Carter Hope Fund unveiled its first major project, a rehabilitation program for families displaced by factory closures. The hall was filled with cameras, reporters, skeptical investors, and hopeful families. As Gabriel spoke about change and renewal, the room buzzed with whispers about the young woman seated beside him. When the questions turned sharp, accusing Gabriel of exploiting tragedy, Rosaline rose before he could answer. Her voice trembled at first, but then steadied with each word. "My name is Rosaline Carter," she said, her gaze sweeping across the crowd. "Years ago, Thomas Sinclair destroyed my family's livelihood. My father died from the weight of that loss. My mother from the grief that followed. I should hate the Sinclair name. For years I did. But today I live because of a heart transplant, and the heart that beats in my chest once belonged to Thomas Sinclair. Every day I wake up knowing I carry inside me the man I once thought I could never forgive. But I chose forgiveness not for him but for me, because hatred only poisons the person who holds it, because forgiveness frees us to live again." The room fell silent, the weight of her words sinking deep into every corner. Gabriel looked at her, his chest tight with admiration, his eyes filled with something beyond love, something like reverence. She continued, her voice stronger now. "Gabriel Sinclair is not his father. He has chosen to build, not destroy. He has chosen to heal, not harm. If you cannot see the difference, then perhaps it is not Gabriel who is blind, but you." Her words broke through the noise of skepticism like a blade through fog, and for the first time she felt the burden of years lift from her shoulders. From that moment, their bond was no longer just personal, it was a symbol. Newspapers began calling them the heart that forgives, a story of two families bound by tragedy but transformed by grace. Families from towns long abandoned by corporate greed began reaching out, offering their support, their gratitude, their hope. The foundation grew stronger not because of money alone, but because people believed in the story it represented, that even the deepest wounds could heal, that even the heaviest burdens could be lifted, that even the most broken hearts could beat again. One evening, months later, as Rosaline stood in the quiet of her apartment, the city lights flickering like stars beyond her window, she placed her hand against her chest and listened to the steady rhythm within. It no longer felt foreign. It no longer felt borrowed. It was hers to live, hers to love, hers to forgive. Gabriel entered the room, carrying the weariness of another long day, but also the quiet joy of a man who knew he was finally walking the path he was meant to take. He crossed the space between them, taking her hand in his. "Do you ever think about it?" he asked softly. "About how all of this began?" She nodded, her lips curving into a faint smile. "Every day, and every day I thank God that pain didn't have the last word." She leaned against him, her head resting against his shoulder, the sound of his heartbeat mingling with her own. For the first time in years, she felt whole, not because the past had been forgotten, but because it had been redeemed. And so their story became more than theirs alone. It became a lesson whispered in hospital halls, in small towns rebuilding from loss, in homes where grief still lingered like shadows. It became proof that life was not measured by what was taken from us, but by what we chose to build with what remained. The man who had ruined her family could never undo the damage he had done. But his heart carried inside her had become something else entirely, a symbol of renewal, of forgiveness, of love stronger than hate. In the end, Rosaline Carter discovered that the true miracle was not survival. It was transformation. And as she stepped forward into a future once denied to her, she knew the heart that had once carried destruction now carried hope, not because it had changed, but because she had.